directly. So we want you to hear as much as possible, and then we can follow up with you. And Todd isn't going to be able to make it. So welcome to today's Program and Grants Committee meeting of the Maine Recovery Council. And it would be great if we could start with introductions. So I'll just go around the screen. I'll start with Pat, and you can introduce yourselves and your role in the council.
So my name is Pat Kimball. I'm retired after working in the field of substance abuse and mental health for over 30 plus years. I am the current chair of the Maine Recovery Council. Welcome.
Bruce.
Good afternoon. Bruce Nodden. I'm with the Maine Reentry Network. And I think most importantly, I'm a person in long-term recovery and a person who lives with mental health challenges. And I'm on the council.
Excellent. Haley.
Haley Tranko with the Attorney General's Office.
Brendan.
Brendan O'Neill. I'm an Assistant Attorney General in the Maine Attorney General's Office.
Kina.
Hey there, Kina Thakrar, local infectious disease and addiction medicine doc in Portland.
Great. Liz.
All right, Liz Blackwell-Moore. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Public Health for Cumberland County Public Health Department.
Great. Ben.
Good afternoon, Benjamin Mann. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Finance at the Maine Department of Health and Human Services, and I sit on the Maine Recovery Council as a representative of the governor.
Perfect. Ella.
I'm Ella Capin. I'm with the AG's office as a research assistant.
Great. Eric. Courtney.
Hello, everybody. My name is Courtney Gary Allen. I am the organizing director of the Maine Recovery Advocacy Project and also a person with living experience of substance use. I serve on the council, but I do not, as a reminder to Haley, do not serve on this committee and therefore do not have a vote nor constitute quorum.
Excellent. And I don't think Chastity, she's driving, so I'm not sure that she can introduce herself, but
I can, but I won't turn my camera on right now.
Okay, perfect.
I'm Chastity Toole. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Northern Maine Director of Harm Reduction Services at Maine Access Points and represent the harm reduction community on the council.
Mary.
Hello, I am the coordinator for the Maine Recovery Council.
Great. And I'm Joe Everett, the President and CEO of the Opportunity Alliance here in South Portland, and I am a member of the council and the chair of the Program Grants Committee. And we have a few guests, so I'm going to just introduce our guests. So Beth, want to go ahead?
Hi, yes, I'm Beth Broderick and I work for the Maine Youth Action Network, which is what I'm representing here today.
Excellent. Adam.
Hi, my name is Adam Burke. I'm the Executive Director in New England for the Peter Alfond Foundation. And with me, but perhaps on the other side of the screen, are partners, including Julia Sleeper at Tree Street Youth, Don Carpenter at Maine Rural Youth Institute, and Sue Campbell and Katie Lutz at Out Maine.
Great. Louise.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Louise Marsden. I'm the Senior Program VP at the Opportunity Alliance, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. Did I miss anyone? Okay, great. We need to review the January 24th minutes, which were excellent, transcribed by or taken by Chastity. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Can I make one change and adjustment in it?
Sure.
Because so on the second page where it says that I said we can't do it, what I actually said was we don't have the capacity to do it. We don't currently have the capacity, and that changes what I said greatly. So I'd like the minutes to reflect that.
Yes, Pat and I remember that's exactly what you said. So thank you. Any other revisions before we ask for a motion again? So can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Second.
Kina. Haley, do you want to call the roll, please?
Haley, you're muted.
Yep. 1 second,
Yep.
just bringing up the voting template.
I was just going to say yes, because I knew it was me first.
And just a reminder for the those on the committee, to vote, you have to activate your video.
Liz Blackwell Moore,
Yes.
Todd Brackett, Joe Everett,
Yes.
Courtney, no, not Courtney, Pat Kimball,
Yes.
Bruce Nodden,
Yes.
Miles Olet, Gordon Smith, Keena Thacker,
Yes.
and Chastity Toole.
Yes.
All right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. So I think it carries.
Mm-hmm.
How many people are on this committee? 11? 10?
10.
Okay.
Thank you, Haley.
Okay, yeah, just barely carries then. Okay.
Yeah. So, as a matter of business for our upcoming meetings, I want to propose that we return to our schedule of 3 to 5. I know people were struggling with the 2 to 4. So, is it the will of the group to sort of move back to our 3 to 5 and eventually maybe even back to 3 to 4:30 when we don't have so much on our plates? Okay, great. Haley, I'll send you the agenda for that meeting.
Thank you.
And now I want to sort of turn it over to Pat, Mary, and Ben to walk us through the next hour of sort of what they've learned around procurement, et cetera. So Pat, I'll let you kick it off, and then Mary, anything you want to add, and then we will have our guests follow after that.
So I don't have a lot to add, but because Ben has the details of it. Although this isn't the finance committee, this is the grants and programs committee. There's been a switch in the way we have to look at the finance and procure our contracts, because of what we discovered in a meeting with several people looking at the way the MOU, particularly the statute, is allowing us to disperse funds. So I want, when you hear this, that we have, I think it's a good plan B. We can't do plan A, which we will discover we can't amend state contracts. So, and Ben is going to explain how that is and how that will work a little bit better. And we'll also go into more detail. If you have real detailed questions, we'll be talking about it again with the full council. But that's all I have to say. And I'm going to let Ben talk about what we discovered in the fact that, for the sake of getting this money out in a timely manner, right now we cannot currently just simply amend those contracts and move forward. So, and I don't know if Mary has anything to add to that before we turn it over to Ben.
Nope. Yeah, I'll set to turn over to you, Ben.
You're on, Ben.
Great. Since last summer, I've been operating on the impression that it was going to be complicated, but we could use Maine Recovery Council funding to supplement DHHS contracts. I have been working more intensely on that since the council voted in December and approved funding for certain purposes with certain expectations around how that funding would get out. It has come to light that without changes to the MOU or legislative approval, I am being told that we cannot transfer funding or use Maine Recovery Council funding for DHHS contracts. So I will, we can get into that a little bit more, but that is not the only reason why I think this alternative plan makes a lot of sense, because what I have heard from several, if not many, council members is also that there are certain expectations around how we want the contracts to function. For example, I've at least informally heard that there is a strong preference that funding should be provided up front instead of after the fact. That is against state procurement rules, and I cannot do that, or we cannot do that through state contracts. Additionally, even if I could, I couldn't do that in the same contract with the syringe service providers, because then there would be two different payment mechanisms in the same contract, and it would be amazingly confusing, and it wouldn't make sense. So we wouldn't want to do that even if we could. So, and that I think there are going to be other questions that come up that people feel council members want that have certain expectations or how things might function that state contracts may or may not fit within. So with that, I think we have been discussing this, and the new plan is for the Maine Recovery Council, or my suggestion would be that the Maine Recovery Council put in place its own contracts, which I honestly think is going to be faster and more nimble because it will reflect the expectations around the council as well to a better extent. And those council contracts, I think I have been going back and forth calling them OAG contracts or Recovery Council contracts because it is, the council is kind of part of the OAG, at least from a funding perspective. But DHHS could help provide management support for those contracts, for the administration and management of it. For example, the CDC team has monthly meetings with syringe service providers every month. And so we don't need to stand up new meetings. We could have Mary or others from the council join those meetings so that they have. So we're trying to build in some efficiencies here, and providers can still go through their main way that they're doing business. And they would just have two different contracts instead of a contract with two different pieces in it. But there are, and I also, and I know Mary's been working with the CDC team on amending those contracts. We can turn that and use the contracts kind of written already. So I think we can, we don't necessarily lose much, if at all, any time on this, because I think those templates are already a work in progress, and we're working towards that. They would just be put in place under the Recovery Council itself, as opposed to DHHS. I realize this is a change in direction, so I'm happy to answer any questions. I guess the final thing I'll say is, I think we should pursue that same course of action with Maine Recovery Council contracts for the Piscataquis Recovery Center. And we should have a discussion as a council on how we want to handle SUD residential treatment beds, the detox beds, and the whole family services. I think both of those are on a slightly longer time frame. And I do, and we will be, I plan on submitting budget initiatives so DHHS can accept funding should the council want to pursue this in the future. It would be subject to legislative approval first, and if the council does not want to use DHHS in the future, it would just go unused, but at least we would have this option in the future, and we don't have to amend the MOU. I was going to do that in chunks, but I just said it all out loud, so that's a lot of information. I'm happy to back up and explain anything that folks want to have more detail on.
May I just ask one quick question? Ben, do you think I think Plan B sounds great. Thank you for coming up with Plan B. I think it sounds awesome. The part around asking about legislative approval, I'm just wondering if you think that having Maine Recovery Council funds going into I don't know, would it go into the general fund to go to DHHS? I'm wondering if that would go into any of the spending caps that there are in place, that I know there's some issues about whether or not the legislator is going to bump up against them anyway. And if we even want to go there, or if it's just understanding that might not even be an option for us and we just need to go down this other Plan B route.
So Liz, I can answer that question a little bit, if that's okay, Ben. So the piece about changing any of the legislation will come before the full council, and there'll be a huge discussion around it, because you pointed out some concerns right there in making any changes in the way that regulation is. So it will be a conversation because we all know that changing legislation is not an easy task. But we also want to make, and if we go in with the wrong language, we know it's not easy to get it out. So that conversation, any conversation in regards to legislative change, will go before the full council, and it will be fully vetted amongst all of us before we move forward. Yeah,
Great.
because
Great.
yeah,
it's a larger conversation, which is great. We
Yeah.
don't have to have it here and then have it again. I appreciate that.
But right now, again, the concern is that we're going to manage these few contracts. But remember, we only have one staff member, so we'll keep looking at it and then move forward. But it will be a larger conversation because it's a big deal to change legislation because it doesn't change easy back and forth. Thank you.
Courtney.
I will.
Go ahead, Ben.
Just to respond to that quickly, I was not suggesting that we change any underpinning of the Maine Recovery Council. The only piece of legislation that would be proposed is within the Department of Health and Human Services and the ability for DHHS to accept this type of funding. I will explain that more in a second, but Courtney has her hand up.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Thanks, Ben. And I just reiterate what Liz says. Thanks for doing this upfront work. And I love the Plan B. The one question I have is I heard you talk about making a contract, the Maine Recovery Council making a contract with the syringe service programs and possibly the Recovery Community Center contract, and then the detox and the flexible family funding going through the department if we are able to make those changes and that works out. What about the other two prevention programs, the one we're going to hear about later today?
My understanding was never that the prevention programs were going to flow through DHHS. So those were not on my radar and I was not running with that. My understanding was that that funding was going to be provided directly for those two prevention purposes from the Recovery Council directly to those organizations outside of DHHS.
Okay, I think there was a little bit of confusion then because TOA, and it's weird to talk about TOA like they're not here, but TOA has a state contract. So I guess I had an assumption that it would just be an amended contract, but I would prefer the Maine Recovery Council to do it anyways. Great, thanks.
Thank you all for being so understanding. I was kind of dreading this conversation because I feel responsible in part or in large part for it because things are complicated always, basically. And I do think having the Maine Recovery Council put contracts in itself will simplify things, although I realize Brendan might not feel the same way, but I don't want to MC this committee but I'll stop talking. Bruce, you have your hand up.
Go ahead, Bruce.
No, I just trying to get my head straight. You did give us a lot of stuff and really appreciate it, Ben. I was just thinking that with the contract for the detox beds in Andro and Franklin, that it's going to take a great amount of expertise. And I didn't think that you suggested, tell me if I'm wrong, I didn't think that you suggested that it had to go through DHHS, but that there could be some expertise that would be lended to our process from DHHS so that it could still be an MRC thing. But maybe the scoring, maybe the, kind of the stuff that we're looking for, maybe, lending some expertise to it. Because maybe there are some people on the council that are experts in this stuff, but, for the most part, we don't know how to score these things. We don't know exactly what's needed what we should be even asking for in building those contracts.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There needs to be there doesn't necessarily need to be a lengthy or really a procurement process at all for the syringe service providers, or based on my understanding of what the December vote was, I was not there, which is unhelpful. that there wasn't going to be there was a provider in mind for Piscataquis Recovery Center already. So that would obviate the need for a procurement process. There does need to be, I would, from my view, and I think this is what we've discussed, a procurement process or some sort of announcement and applications to provide detox beds. There's licensing requirements and significant other aspects that we would want to make sure that providers had, that honestly the Recovery Council just doesn't have the infrastructure to vet. And so I think it would certainly be part of and have the ultimate discretion over, but I do think DHHS would still play a role in that, or we can. But that is on a longer time frame. So I'm pretty confident that we can resolve the issue of having DHHS put contracts in place through budgetary language. We're not going to be done with that procurement process for the detox beds in that time frame. So I think the ability to do that, again, my point at the top was going to be, I do think the council, we should have more deeper conversations about expectations around who puts those contracts in place and what the role of the council is. I do think it's a little clearer on syringe service providers and the recovery center, because those were more immediate. And I think there wasn't going to be, I think we can move forward with that with Recovery Council contracts now and continue to discuss the other aspects of it. I can explain a little bit more about the transfer authority problems if folks want. Back to Liz's question. This is squarely like this is like my day job, but I will there's no, the Recovery Council funding is treated similarly to Fund for Healthy Maine funding that is incoming settlement dollars from older tobacco settlements that happened decades ago. The funding is very discrete and it's completely separate. It's completely separate from general fund dollars or federal dollars. It's considered its own thing. General fund dollars, the fund type is 010. Fund for Healthy Maine is 024. There's other fund types. Maine Recovery Council opioid settlement dollars is 027. It has its own separate, we separated out these funds completely from everything else. So because of that separate fund type, DHHS, that's the only 027 account in the state. DHHS has no 027 accounts because they didn't exist until the Maine Recovery Council got set up. So we cannot accept dollars from that and would need to create such accounts. And that is, as a footnote, we need to decide basically tomorrow if you want DHHS to do this, because I need to submit this budget initiative to DAFs and make sure that we can get it included in the budget, which is imminent. So that is part of the reason why we can't do that, and which is why it's rooted in the MOU. And the MOU was based in was structured similar to Fund for Healthy Maine for folks that have any background or understanding of that separate settlement. But I'll stop there at the risk of boring everyone.
So Ben, when you speak of certain information you got to get to DAFs, is that around the management when you spoke of DHHS playing a management role?
No, so
could you speak more to that when you talk about the management role they could play? Could you kind of talk more about kind of what that would look like and if there's costs associated with that? Because maybe there isn't today, but down the road there could be.
Yeah, let me back up, and I should have said this off the top. I have talked to many of my colleagues, both at the Behavioral Office of Behavioral Health. I know Director Squirrel has come in and talked to you all, and Dr. Va, who is the CDC director, and others on my team, which is all finance and operations. Folks are like excited about the ability to get more funding out to and support the services that in part DHHS already provides. So this, I just wanted to make sure that you all heard that DHHS is still willing to help. I think the ability to help is more in question right now, but with putting in place the contracts through the Maine Recovery Council, I think there's questions about capacity, right? The Maine Recovery Council apparatus right now is Mary Coyne, who is a contracted resource, and then 15 private citizens in Maine that have day jobs. We have not hired additional capacity to create announcements. And then obviously the OAG, I'm sorry, but the OAG is also sort of the backbone and provides the support for this as well, but is not equipped to do putting in place numerous contracts and managing those contracts. That is not the role of the Office of the Attorney General vis-a-vis the Maine Recovery Council. So I've talked to my team, and instead of having DHHS formally sort of, having the syringe services funding flow through DHHS contracts, we could build into the contract that DHHS will help administer the contracts in coordination with the Maine Recovery Council. In fact, if that was a prerogative of the council, I would want to build that into the contract so roles and responsibilities are clear and we don't have any ambiguity on who is doing what, especially because there is very limited capacity at the Maine Recovery Council. I think we can put in these contracts, and they're kind of, like I said, they're kind of already written, but they would just, change from a DHHS contract to a Maine Recovery Council. But then there's questions of when providers have questions, who are they can contact Mary, and then Mary can go to the council. But I think, there might be some synergies and efficiencies to work with the CDC as well on reporting requirements that are necessary to put in place in the contracts based on settlement requirements and things like that, or more technical questions about use of the funds. In no way I would want DHHS to be answering questions on behalf of the Maine Recovery Council, but I think some of just the infrastructure and ability to support the providers in putting the contracts in place and then overseeing them could be through existing DHHS resources.
Thank you.
I think, I would have, again, for my day job, I think if putting in contracts from the Maine Recovery Council, I think there might be audit questions about who is overseeing the contracts, which is why I think it makes sense to at least offer and articulate support through the contract with DHHS, because there is existing folks who work on similar services.
So I just have a quick question, because I don't want to derail this meeting, because I know we have guests presenting. But my question is to Brendan, and again, if it's a long question, I'll ask you later on, or I'll ask you at the full meeting. But in order to change that, is it that legislation? Can you simply put that through the budget process, or does that have to go through emergency rule change? Or am I too deep?
I think a little bit. I think what Ben is, and Ben, you should correct me if I'm misunderstanding. I think what Ben is suggesting is language that would go into the budget that would cover, what is it, a biennium, and would not, as I understand it, would not be an amendment to the council's existing legislation, and it would not have any effect, because it can't, on the MOU itself. So the MOU and the council's existing legislation are the sort of foundational background documents that define the council and its authority. And as I understand it, the budget language that Ben is talking about would affect neither of those. Instead, it would be a grant of authority to DHHS to accept funding from the Recovery Council.
Okay.
And so I looked at Ben to tell me whether I've misstated that.
Okay, that's much easier to concept. Thank you.
And Courtney is exactly right. It is a budget initiative. I mean, there's technically a difference between budget initiatives and budget language. This would be a budget initiative that would create the 027 account. And I have two different initiatives. I'm considering three, because I need one for OBH, I need one for CDC, and if the intent is to have whole family services flow through the CAP agencies through a DHHS contract, that is a different office. That's the Office of Family Independence. So that would be a separate initiative as well. So we would be establishing new accounts within those existing programs to accept Maine Recovery Council funding. It will look like it's a fund, it will be worded as a funding transfer. There is no money flowing from the Maine Recovery Council to DHHS. It is allotment. It is the authority to spend. And if the Recovery Council wanted to put over $700,000 for whole family services to CAP agencies, we would be able. It would say we would then be able to make that transfer, which it would be called a budgeted transfer because it would be on the books with the legislature approval of that. Courtney?
Super quick, and we can talk about this more later, but I see, as somebody who does the work every day in the State House, I see no problem with this whatsoever. I don't have any red flags or concerns. It's just, it seems like a very clear and straightforward administrative technical change or initiative.
Yes, I would frame because I will be testifying about the DHHS budget to AFA and HHS committees. I would frame this as an administrative change. This is just the ability to accept those funds. I have the initiative here if you all want me to put it on the screen.
Ben, well, you're going to share it with the full council, right? Tomorrow?
I'll send it, yes. Yep.
Yeah. And when did you have to appear before them? Are you expecting a vote from the council tomorrow?
Well, Pat, the council's already voted to authorize this
Okay.
money to go out the door to these things. And I think someone, maybe Haley or others, can correct me. I think the vote encompassed the concept already of DHHS, whatever. I'm going to use the wrong language here, but basically, administering the RFP and getting the money out the door to the detox centers. So, others can chime in whether you think there's an additional vote needed, but
I also, I don't want to parse things, and this is going to sound maybe a little awkward, but it's technically a DHHS initiative, right? I'm not doing the council. It changes nothing with the council. It changes DHHS structure. It allows DHHS to accept Recovery Council funding. So I'll just say the awkward part is I don't know if there needs to be a vote or formal approval. I wanted just awareness, and if people didn't want DHHS to do this, it just takes an option off the table, and I wouldn't submit the initiatives, and it would still be subject to DAFs. The governor, has to. It's going to be part of the governor's budget, but it is just it's just within the walls of DHHS.
So Ben, would you be looking for some signal from the council tomorrow about going forward with this?
I will be honest, I hadn't contemplated a formal action or exactly.
We can have a consensus. We can have a conversation, have a consensus of the group.
I think we can say Ben's going to go forward unless the council says otherwise or wants to say otherwise.
That makes sense to me.
I have a couple of things that I want to say, but I did see Bruce's hand.
I put my hand down because it's kind of off subject, but I remember very clearly some of the kind of nightmarish reporting that Chastity was when she was reading the letter from her boss. And I'm just hoping that we can all kind of keep in mind that hopefully we can make this less cumbersome than maybe it could be.
This will make some of that go away.
That would be wonderful if our intention just is to make this easier so that they could spend more time, helping people rather than spending way more time reporting. So I'm just hoping we have this kind of thought in mind as we're going through this process. That's all.
And if I could just add some to Bruce in the sake of time, because we do have guests. Pat and I talked about sort of where things belong in this committee or the finance committee. And one of the issues as a provider that I could not raise during the conversation because mine is a program of TOA is the whole need for indirect. And I really think we need to have a conversation at the council or the finance committee, because I think we have people here today presenting that don't really have clarity around, in my opinion, around that, because as providers, and this is just the good news is that TOA was up first to receive funding, but it also limited my ability to participate in the conversation. So I would want that conversation to land somewhere, and I think it probably belongs to the finance committee. But it's a very important conversation for providers, and that we can't just all willy-nilly assign indirect. It has to be uniform across the organization. So just wanted that also added to a conversation somewhere. And it might show up in the presentations today. And I know that's hard for the guests, but Brendan, go ahead.
Just briefly, sort of 3 points. A couple of things Ben talked about, just to remind everyone that the Recovery Council funds are structured to be like the Fund for Healthy Maine, intentionally, as I understand it, as a means of protecting the Recovery Council funds so that they're not spent on other things. There are other guardrails in place in the settlements themselves that restrict the use of the funds to, the approved uses. But just want to point out that the sort of 027, issue to some degree is a result of putting guardrails around the abatement money. The other point to mention about that Ben referred to is, I think as you understand, the Attorney General's office doesn't have like the kind of contracting team that is at DHHS that handles like the front end of contracting, the back end of administering grants and things like that. And I don't anticipate that we're going to, develop even a skeleton crew. And I noticed the comment in the notes from the provider that Chastity had circulated, referring to, Department of Contract Management being understaffed. It's not understaffed compared to the OAG's office regarding contracting. And so there probably, I have been thinking there needs to be another conversation at another time about contracts, contract management, and how the structure of how the council gets its money out the door. We've begun those conversations internally in my office. We're doing some thinking about that, some research and so on. And then finally on the issue, just to briefly talk about Bruce's point, certainly the council has the ability to put less restrictions on things or less requirements, less onerous, reporting, things like that. Nonetheless, there will be some restrictions because the money can only be used for the approved uses. And there will need to be some reporting requirements. And this will be, we talked about, or maybe the report from the provider talked about there's multiple funding streams, which Ben alluded to. This will be yet another funding stream that, the provider will have to keep separate because the use of these funds will be different from the use of the state funds and from the federal funds. So, certainly that, Bruce's point is an important point. There are considerations, sort of on the other side of that as well.
Thank you, Brendan. Liz, and then Gordon quickly, and then we'll move on to our guests.
Yeah, very quickly, and it only matters because there's a bill up right now. I would say that there's been dialogue between the Fund for Healthy Maine watching what's happening here because the money isn't protected in the same way that we would hope it would be. And so right now the money is being taken and used for Maine Care reimbursements, and is actually like there's a huge cliff coming. And so they're actually trying to move it into a trust where it would be more protected, more like the Recovery Council. It only matters because there's a piece of legislation right now that's really important. And so I don't want there to be misinformation. I hear what you're saying about there are guardrails, but we actually have more guardrails than that money does. And at it being protected, and I think that's great.
Thank you. Gordon.
Also, quickly, and I'm sorry to be late. Came in about 2:30 after a legislative work session. I've thought a lot about the need to pivot and do some of our own contracts, at least for this first tranche of funds. And I'm sure, Brennan, that you and the internal discussions in the AG's office have noted this possibility. But I think one of the possibilities, obviously, is just as we contracted with Kim Johnson, we could quickly contract with people that might have experience in either writing contracts or doing evaluation. We can't put it all on Mary. But I think with the number of contracts that we have, that particularly we could find an experienced, interested person. It wouldn't be too early to start looking around for such an individual, in my opinion, to not put them on the state payroll or anything like that, but just contract with them to help Mary as we get these first contracts done.
Excellent point. Okay, I'm going to end this conversation. Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to turn it over to Mary to open our guests to the meeting and talk about the process for the next hour or so.
Yes, thank you. So we have two organizations here to present on the funding award that was granted to them by the council back in December. So we'll start with Adam Burke, who will lead the presentation for the Peter Alfond Foundation. And I'll invite a couple of your partners to also come on as panelists to potentially answer questions. So Adam will start and go through the presentation, probably about 15 or 20 minutes. And then we'll have Beth Broderick jump on, and she'll present for the Maine Youth Action Network. And then after both presentations, we'll have time for the council to answer questions for both panelists. Does that sound all right with everybody? All right.
Perfect.
So Haley, if you're able to give or turn things over to Adam, that would be great.
Great.
Adam, you should be a co-host now. You should be able to share your screen.
I see that notification. Thanks very much. Well, thanks everybody. Again, my name's Adam Burke, and I'm the Executive Director with the Peter Alfond Foundation. And with me, and I will be joining, at least for the Q&A portion, or others that have been an integral part of what I'm about to share with you. I'm going to share my screen. This is going to work smoothly, and here we go. So what we're looking at here is a strategic approach to youth development in Maine that the Peter Alfond Foundation is following. This was co-designed between 2022 and 2023 through field gatherings that we convened, our relationships with individual organizations, as well as conversations with young people themselves. And I'm not going to go through everything that you're seeing in this graphic right now, but I want you to know that this is a center point and grounding for how we're approaching our work. The idea that ultimately young people are living their best possible lives. And we know that if they feel like they matter and that they belong, that these are protective factors that are going to help ensure that. And that the positive childhood experience and positive youth development frameworks are a reliable means of accomplishing these senses of mattering and belonging. And I want to focus on the blue ring, which is the second outermost ring. And these are two catalytic actions that the foundation is using its financial and other resources towards within the field right now. So on the one hand, it's working to build and assist the state-wide youth development field, which we could say has been disorganized outside of perhaps the YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs, which have a national network and infrastructure that they're part of. All the great work that's happening in communities around the state has been rather isolated and hasn't had opportunities to convene, to share practices, resources, and etc. So that's one part of what we're investing in right now, based on what we heard from people that was needed. And secondly, that we're building capacity directly in the folks that are doing work in communities. And this is a synergistic effect that these two things interact. Oh, went way too far, too fast. So what it looks like in practice is that Currently, there is a second generation of our learning cohort going forward. We're working with Tree Street Youth, Rural Youth Institute in Out Maine as key partners in the facilitation and implementation of this learning cohort. And you see the folks that are working as part of the cohorts and other grantees that I thought you would find that are relevant, that are part of our work around the state. And what's happening here is Tree Street Youth, Rural Youth Institute in Out Maine are designing and co-facilitating large gatherings, one that we just had in early December, another that we'll have in spring, but they're also facilitating what we're calling micro cohorts, where smaller groups of these organizations are participating in monthly gatherings, virtually and in person, to receive training, to do leadership development, to learn from each other, to develop goals with accountability, all sorts of things that they can answer for you in more detail when we get to the Q&A. Well, I'm not trying to jump to my last slide yet. I am trying to keep moving at a quick clip here. So I'm going to keep going. The other thing that we've learned and that we're upholding are these effective field practices. So when we started looking into what young people need now, coming through COVID and shutdown, it didn't seem like things that we had understood to be reliable and useful were working anymore. It's certainly not evident in the MIAS data or other reports that we see of how young people are doing today. So one of the essential questions was just essentially what's working for young people and what's not. And importantly, we talk to young people themselves to answer that question, as well as those that work most closely with them. And these field practices are things that we're holding up as that these are working right now, not only by those reports that I just mentioned, but also they're backed by the evidence-based research in the positive childhood experiences and positive youth development. So this is where our evidence-based practices come from that we're amplifying and upholding in the youth development field across the state today. There's a whole range of them. Each one of them is important and useful. Different organizations might use different ones to as their headline, if you will. You might think of one youth development organization, be like, oh yeah, they go outside with kids. Or you might be like, oh yeah, that's about developing professional networks. That's true, but it's the connectedness of using multiple of these practices that's ultimately what's effective for young people. And in the folks on the previous slide that we're in relationship with, we know that these practices are in use, even if it's not necessarily the headline of the organization. I hope that makes sense. Again, happy to answer questions about it as we move along. What I want to say here is when we look at the Exhibit E and other materials that have come out from the council, that these are like two sides of the same coin. Sometimes in the youth development field versus what's happening in the prevention field, there's different words and different language being used, but they're accomplishing the same goals and outcomes ultimately. And that the field practices that I just showed you are the ways in which some of the things that we see on this Exhibit E, particularly these items 9 through 12, are being accomplished in the youth development field. And again, my partners that are on the call can provide more specific examples. Here again, looking at strategies that I pulled out of the Connections to the Maine Opioid Response Plan. These 5 strategies align with the work that these organizations are doing, that strategy that I showed you on the first slide, and might use some different language, might use different like positional titles, because we're talking about different contexts in which the work is happening, but it is very much similar, if not the same work. From a timeline perspective, as I mentioned in the fall, we launched the second version of our learning cohort. We've been working with partners, Tree Street Rural Youth Institute in Out Maine to define a shared vision for what it looks like to elevate the youth development field in Maine. I'm going to walk through that with you in just a moment, because that's directing how the use of funds that you've generously awarded to the youth development field will be used. We're very much in the middle of just developing those strategic uses of your funding. We'll talk more and look more at that. This spring, there'll be another cohort gathering when we'll gather all the organizations that you saw on that page. together. And then we're looking at this summer, based on what our understanding is of the timeline for executing a contract and moving funding, is that we would issue funding simultaneously between the foundation and the MRC funding to accomplish intentions that I heard discussed on this call, that it's as efficient as possible, it's not adding new layers of burden, and et cetera, right? So that's how we're lined up right now. So I want to talk about these 5 themes for elevating the youth development field to help you understand how we're going to utilize the funding that you've awarded. Julia Sleeper from Tree Street Youth facilitated this process, and we used what they've used at Tree Street, which is how are we going to understand we're successful, both at, what represents a large theme of the work that we're engaged in, but also what are very concrete and tangible outcomes that essentially anybody can look and see whether that thing is true or not. So that's what you're going to see represented on these pages. So one of the ways that we'll know this work is successful is that youth development leaders are supported. And the measures include that there's not so much burn and churn. As you all know in your own fields, that when there's high turnover, it doesn't get you the results you want. Relationships are essential. You need those to stay intact. That first measure is focused there. Secondly, that youth development executives can name a field mentor or coach that they work with regularly. Again, this is prominent, whether it's in education, whether it's in medicine, so many other fields. It's so common to have, a mentorship and coach relationship built in. It's not necessarily the case in youth development. We know that it's a lonely space to be in, and this is something that will help shift the experience for young people across the state. And lastly, there's a visible menu of staff development opportunities and the funding and resources for people to participate. So it's one thing to say, here's a training. It's another to say that it costs too much money for you to attend. So that's something that we're not trying to replicate. The second theme looks really simple on the surface, that ultimately what young people are experiencing is an essential measure of whether we're successful here. At one level, it's just, can any young person in the state identify a safe and trusted environment and person outside their house or school, right? We know that having 2 or more trusted adults is a key protective factor. We know that having a safe place to be is a protective factor. So this is the baseline that needs to be true. And I'll just say, layered in here is all those practices that we believe that a safe and trusted environment exists when those practices that were upheld earlier are being utilized. Third, funding, another kind of very obvious one, but the youth development space, like others, I think like public health, are constantly cobbling together resources. Essentially, I'm going to make a joke here, but I don't mean to trivialize it, like trying to figure out how they're going to buy the next box of Nature Valley granola bars, right? Well, they're already an essential safety net in our communities that are stopping things from happening that none of us want to see happen already. So in order for this already existing safety net to be successful, they need ongoing intentional funding. The foundation's participating in that, you're participating in that, and we think that needs to continue occurring. So again, thank you for already helping to put a positive indicator on this measure. Fourth is that there's equitable access, that every young person in Maine has access to safe and affirming community-based youth development organizations, programs, and people without financial barriers. There's a lot that this statement is saying. It's what we're talking about when we look at outcomes for LGBTQ plus youth, and we know that they're worse when we're looking at whether it's substance use, whether it's suicidality, whether it's experiencing violence, etc., that they absolutely deserve to have access to a safe and affirming community-based youth development organization. So the work that we're doing in those micro cohorts more broadly are to ensure that the spaces that already exist can be this, and we'll learn where there are not existing and what we might be able to do about that as well. And that's not just a limit to the experience of LGBTQ youth. I'm just using them as one example of what it looks like in practice. Likewise, the last theme is about bridging gaps, that we know that when community-based youth development organizations are in relationship with schools, with families, with JJAG, with others that are involved in young people's lives, the more effective they are to support and champion young people. So one other thing that we're after is to ensure that we're bridging those gaps, and we see community-based youth development organizations as an essential liaison and champion for young people to maintain, organize those relationships, and to be present with them. So that was a lot. I was trying to save where I went deep for perhaps where it mattered. But for our budget, here's where we are. We're trying to utilize the money that you've awarded in flexible and layered ways across those 5 themes. I'll show a little bit more about what that means in just a moment. We're being sustainability minded. We're counting this as one-time funding over the course of 2 years. We're not trying to start things that we can't keep going, right? We're likewise trying to be thoughtful about how we might use the funding to start things that could demonstrate and gain traction, but not be fully reliant on a further tranche of funding in this way. We're looking at a majority of funding going towards capacity building, training, and leadership development. We're looking at a limited but meaningful amount of money, and this is being sustainability minded, going towards including organizations that are outside of that current cohort. We're looking at limited, but again, meaningful funding for collaboration and innovation pilots, again, with that sustainability minded principle, and that there'll be limited amount of funding, the least amount going towards research and evaluation to help us move forward along those 5 themes. And then lastly, really important to the conversation that you had before the opportunity to speak is the administration or indirect costs. So my understanding is that $15,000 of the award was intended to perhaps be used for administrative costs. The Peter Alfano Foundation is a unique partner, I think, for the council, and the fact that we're not, we are a grant-making organization, right? So we're already doing a lot of what is necessary to get these dollars to those that are working directly with young people. That said, we went through a lot of complexity of what it might look like to contract and administer these funds. So at this point, we're, optimistically thinking that we could say that a 1% contingency would be held for administrative costs. So it depends on how complicated things get. If the contract's really complicated, we need to engage legal counsel. If the accounting processes are really complicated and we need to bring in some additional accounting resources to support us to make sure that we don't run afoul with the IRS, like, we need to do that. But our intention is to put through all the money and not take an administrative cut if possible. Okay. And then just try to get as concrete as possible for you. This is what that all looks like together. So I walked through the where we think the majority of funding would go, the capacity building, training, and leadership development. Talked about the layeredness of how that goes with the themes that I discussed. So you can see how each of those funding categories or foci relate to the themes. And then just to give you some concrete examples of what that even means at the end of the day, right? So capacity could mean like addressing transportation. It could be addressing, back office finance support, so an organization is stable and able to do the work that they need to do. And training, it could look like simply making accessible first aid and CPR training and Narcan training to all those that are in our cohort. And the examples go on. I'm not going to walk through them one by one, but I wanted you to have as much concrete information as possible on what it would look like to go forward. So that's where we are in the budgeting. I hope that's helpful at this time, particularly addressing that administrative item. I can give you further examples of what it could look like if this isn't grounded enough for you, but knowing that we're in February and we're at least a couple months out from contracting, I hope you know that we'll be working right alongside you to deliver what's needed in the scope of work and in the contract ultimately. So thank you so much for the time. I hope I was within my allotted time. And again, just to say it real concretely, thank you so much for your investment in the youth development field, because it is where lives are being changed daily, saved daily, and it's really, really appreciated. And not only there. That sounded too absolute. Not only there. One of the many places. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That was very good, very good. Any questions for Adam?
Now, I just want to say, I thought it was very informative. I look forward to this relationship and moving forward. And I can only speak for myself, but I think 1% is more than a fair ask. And again, I certainly understand admin costs, but great presentation. I like the idea of the organizations you're currently working with and moving forward. And again, your ability to be able to report back to us the impact that our dollars have is really important to us because we want to be able to make sure that we continue to spend money that way. But thank you very much.
Courtney.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, Adam. Thank you for your presentation and for all the work that you all do. I think I heard you say, but could you reiterate to me that you're focusing on things that are sustainable? Like you're focusing so that you're not creating a budget gap for all of these organizations in the future. Can you just reiterate that to me?
Yeah, so that's the aim. So what can I say about that? Well, one, first of all, to say that, all the organizations that you saw on the slide are already receiving funding from the Peter Alfond Foundation, generally general operating support, to be flexible. And one of the first things to build capacity is to provide that kind of funding, right? So that's kind of a baseline. So from there, let's think about the training line for a second. So the training seems like a particularly strong place to direct funding, in part because it has a return on the investment for more than that one incident, right? While it can cost additional dollars to maintain certification, that those can be limited, considered to the upfront costs, as well as the organizing of those trainings. So that's one place that it makes sense to complement and augment the work that folks are already doing, without putting additional burden on them, hopefully, and not creating a cliff for them. Is that
Perfect.
helpful?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? So we have a question from Miles in the chat.
Yes, sorry. Hi, folks. My camera is not working well, and I figured I'd throw it in the chat, but
Thank you, Miles. Go for
it. Yeah, just Adam, I don't know if you can see the chat, but I was just wondering, and I'm a bit behind on this, but what kind of programs do you folks offer for opioid specific or affected families specifically?
Yeah, so that's a multifaceted answer, in part because it's not anything I do or that the foundation does itself, but it is the work reflected in those 30 organizations that we're supporting and that are essentially part of this award. There's some other folks with me that aren't on the presenter screen right now that it would be better poised to talk about the more specific work they do with opioid affected families. But broadly, I can say that it's integrated and woven into the fabric of our community life at this point, right? And so that the folks that are working in these youth development organizations and working relationship with young people and their parents and all the things that are they've experienced with their loss or existing substance misuse, that's part of what they're working through, and they're using those practices that were early on in the presentation as intervention, as prevention strategies. Prevention strategies is more appropriate frame to use there. But if Julia or Sue or Don can be promoted, they can give you a more specific example.
Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome.
Adam, would you like for your colleagues to have a moment with the council? Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you, Haley.
Yes, we're working to promote them. Sorry for that already.
For the committee, we're not the full council, I guess.
Yeah. Looks like they're starting to come through.
Hi, everyone. Don Carpenter here from the Rural Youth Institute. Just to answer the question that was brought up, I think by Miles, many of the organizations that we're working with may not have people on their payroll that can directly work with families or students who are majorly impacted by the opioid and other challenges showing up in their families. However, what we're trying to do is help them build community support networks by doing some asset mapping in their communities about those who do have those skills. And because they've built the relationship with the family, they can easily be a liaison between the family and the service. And that's the connective tissue that by working with students early on in their upbringing from a preventative strategy and doing long-term engagement with students as they move through their adolescence, while they're building the partnerships with those who are actually doing that type of work, it really, really works well. So people don't have to build all these systems into their youth serving organizations. They just have to have a mandate to not work in isolation with that young person, but instead build these community support networks with those services in their region or in their communities, so that there is a way that they can address whatever's showing up within the family.
Thank you, Don. Other questions for the group?
Yes, to Bruce, Julia just joined.
I'm here.
Welcome.
Just very briefly, just to build off of a lot of what Don was saying, I think there's, as we understand, like this is such a multifaceted issue. The implications and the impact varies so significantly. It can be a direct impact to youth that are participating in the program, such as having parents or family members who are directly in recovery, who are still actively in addiction challenges. It also is something that, in particular, I'll speak for our community here in Lewiston, that the visibility of what kids are experiencing, walking to and from school, living in like smaller, loose term, urban spaces, loose term, but it's really becoming much more visible across the community, the implications of addiction, of usage, of people in recovery, and just doing a lot of that education as well preemptively. Obviously, the goal is to prevent youth from engaging in activities or potentially venturing that pathway themselves, but also having an understanding of what the social emotional wellness that like is oftentimes missing in some of the other venues and settings where a lot of these very high risk youth often are spending their time. So some of it is also about teaching them about themselves, helping them devise, a vision for their future, as well as also just giving safe spaces for kids to exist and be in, get a job for the first time, receive mentoring, eat a meal every single day, to be with their friends, to play on a sports team, all these things that we know are preventative in practice. But when you formalize a network, which is what we're really working to do, of these community-based organizations across the state, they can become a significant support, not just for the individual kids and families who may be more directly impacted, but also to schools. A lot of the work Tree Street does in collaboration with the public school system. We fill in a lot of those different gaps that oftentimes the structures of, say, schools may not be able to intervene with, or that sort of ends at the end of the school day. So those are just some quick examples of some of that preventative work and how it manifests, but it does look different for different regions of the state and different types of partners. But that's also part of the richness, if you will, of this type of support network, because it is adaptive to the cultural needs and practices of the different parts of the state, which I think we're all keenly aware of the nuance and the complexities of different needs in different communities. But that's just some examples.
Thank you. Very helpful. Maybe one last question for the group, since we have to have another guest. One last question or comments from Adam and team?
There's no more questions. I just know that we're, again, grateful for the award and look forward to working with you to getting dollars out, to doing the good work that they're intended to do. And very much appreciate this chance to continue a conversation with you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, Mary, I'll let you introduce our next guest.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Next, we have Beth Broderick, who is going to present about the Maine Youth Action Network's proposed plan for their funding allocation. I will turn it over to Haley to allow you sharing access, and then you can start whenever you're ready.
Awesome, thank you.
And I did upgrade you, Beth. I don't know if you saw that.
I see that. Yeah, I think I'm good to go. Thank you. Let me get that set up and then say hi to you folks. So we've got a pretty backdrop to go with this, but hi again, I'm Beth, and I'm going to be introducing you to the Maine Youth Action Network. So before I get started, I'd like to say thank you also. Thanks for the chance to talk with you all, but especially thank you for the work that the Maine Recovery Council and all the advocates are doing in solidarity with people who are impacted by the ongoing opioid epidemic. I understand that work is personal. It's personal for me. It's personal for members of the Mayan team and for the many partners that we're going to introduce you to today. So thank you. With that, to talk about the Maine Youth Action Network, we're starting with the mission statement. There are two prongs to the way that we approach this work. We work directly with young people. We sponsor work with young people. We subcontract with partners. We convene work with young people to build their leadership. And there's a couple of different areas that work often concentrates in. The other prong of our work is to build the capacity of adults, organizations, and systems to use research-based frameworks like positive youth development, social emotional learning, to be prepared for the moment, wherever that moment comes, to do work with young people and to do it well. And so this is sort of what we're striving for. Our work falls into a couple of buckets. Many folks know the Maine Youth Leadership Conference we host annually. This past November, more than 600 young people, youth, young adults, and adults spent 2 days in the Augusta Civic Center, toward the State House, at UMA, et cetera. And so this is sort of the place where young people come together. And stemming out of that, or sort of feeding into that, Mayan runs workforce development programming, including a summer youth employment program. And there we're really working, again, with both the adults, the employers or would-be employers, to build their capacities to be primed and ready to welcome young people to their sites, to benefit from the competencies and capacities that young people are bringing into the workforce, and simultaneously to prime young people to be prepared to be their best selves, to be ready to contribute, to be ready to succeed as they reach those places, whatever the workforce setting may be. On the other side of the aisle, on the leadership development side, again, we're working with young people and adults to build their leadership skills, to build critical consciousness, to build facilitation skills, to be primed and ready to contribute to their communities. And then finally, the last bucket, we call it training and technical assistance, but I like to think of it as coaching, right? It's a fancy way of saying we offer support and coaching to both young people and adults in organizations and in systems to meet their needs and to use the research practices that we know of in their work. In the bottom left corner here, we've got a couple things that we're excited about for 2024. And I know this is not the call to go into those things, but I'd love to tell you more about them another time. So we work with a national organization a research organization that collects data from youth programming around the country. And we've modified their theory of change slightly to put it here on the screen for you all and to talk about it. The ultimate goal is to see young people thrive. That's our goal. I know that's your goal. And that's sort of like the far right side of your screen. If young people were thriving, they were on the path to thriving, these are some of the long-term outcomes that Hello Insight research plans tells us that we would be able to see, we would be able to observe and measure. How do we get there? We go back to the far left side, and this is where the research-based experiences show up in the programming that Mayan runs and that we are bringing to our larger work that I'm going to introduce to you next. It's positive youth development, and it's the building of social capital. The idea is that we're building the skills young people need in partnership with them. We're connecting them to the resources they need, to the networks, to the supports, and ensuring they have the critical consciousness so that whatever comes next for them, they're prepared. They're prepared to navigate it, and they're prepared to thrive. And so this is the sort of map of how our programming starts on one side and eventually leads to the ultimate goal of young people thriving. Because it's a short presentation, we have a really nice annual report. I'm dropping the link into the chat as I close out this presentation. It's got lots of pretty pictures. It's not your typical annual report. It can be found on our website. And it gives you a good picture of the many things that we have going on at the moment and that we're proud to be in partnership with young people. Although I'm here and I work as part of the Maine Youth Action Network, recently we are grateful to be in community with a series of organizations under the umbrella of the Maine Youth Leadership and Development Council. And so these folks are coming together to share expertise, to learn together, to find ways to improve our programming, and to develop the leadership that the state of Maine needs in work with young people. And right now we're using collective impact strategies to realize this goal of healthy, thriving youth communities. It's a big goal. And so we're going to break that down for you a little bit and talk about how we get there. The folks at the table, you'll see we've got some overlap with the Peter Alfond Foundation, but some of the folks at the table are these folks here who are doing work around the state. I'm going to click through the next couple slides a little bit quickly, but again, I will leave you with the slide deck so you can go back if any of these folks are new to you. These are short descriptions of what each organization does. I think they're the A-team. This is a phenomenal set of organizations doing some really good work around the state, and we're lucky to be in partnership as a group. And so here's what we are working on, right? We said that our ultimate goal is to see young people thriving. In order for that to be true, one of the necessary conditions, one of the things that it needs to look like in order for young people to thrive is that all Maine students have to be able to cultivate belonging, culture, and community within their educational spaces. And so there are a couple of ways that you could look at that or measure that. The Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey data point around young people mattering has been on nearly a 10-year decline, which means it's going in a direction we don't want to see it go. And it's a trend that's reversible. Our goal is to use these system change strategies to build back the number of young people, the percent of young people in our communities who feel like their contributions matter, who feel seen and valued and appreciated, who are cultivating belonging, culture, and community. And so the FSG is Water Systems Change is the model with which this framework is based on. So I've modified it here to look pretty on your screen, but there are three system change strategies that we're using: changing policy or changing the way policy is implemented, sharing power and resources, shifting narratives and mental models. When those three change strategies are in action, they move us to see an increase in the number of young people who are answering affirmatively to the question of mattering in the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey. That target number that you see there is our target for the 2027 Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey. That survey happens every 2 years, and so that's like 2.5 years from now. That would return us to the 2017 levels. So it would get us halfway to our ultimate goal on the far right of the screen of all young people. Okay, 60% is a little more than halfway. It would get us close to halfway, a little more than halfway to the ultimate goal of 100% of young people being able to cultivate belonging and culture and community in their educational experiences. And so when we support young people, this is what we will do. These are our strategies if you break those down. So you'll see that we put some emphasis in changing the policies and how we implement policies, and some emphasis in shifting mental models and narratives, and a lot of emphasis in sharing power and resources. And these strategies, these are goals that our partner organizations have broken out to start to articulate their areas of expertise and their reach. The Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey and the data point that I shared with you is a universal data point. So that speaks to all high school students, but obviously not all high school students are having the same experience in their schools. And so you'll see that we are targeting specific groups of young people in specific areas where young people may or may not need more support. There's 8 organizations or youth partnering organizations that would sort of equally be allocated the funding to drive their programming goals. Each of those partners is in the process of developing deliverable metrics associated with their contributions, and we internally are threading those contributions together so that it is not 8 strategies just sort of like floating in the ether, but 8 tightly woven together strategies moving as one. I've excluded the indirect rates here, as you heard at the top of the call. TOA and the Maine Recovery Council are in conversation about that. But I've tried to show you how each of these organizations would be allocated the programming funds that they need to move their work forward. Change has to be sustainable. Systems change, the idea of systems change is about capacity building here. That's our goal, but also building ladders of leadership. Ladders of leadership within youth communities so that those young people are the next emerging class of professionals promoting this work, but also capacity building within our existing communities. And so our first collective impact goal is creating those conditions necessary for Maine students to cultivate that belonging in their educational settings. And in tandem, the Maine Youth Leadership and Development Council is working to build infrastructure, increasing investment in professional development for the existing adult staff, ensuring that the many opportunities that exist for young people are functionally available, that the young person over here can find them, can access them, can make meaning of them, and continuing to push for more adequate and anti-racist evaluation of youth development work in the state. And so although those things are not showing up in here, those are the pieces I think that we are building towards and hoping to eventually see as more of the like status quo, the things that we expect. Have a couple of websites here for you all. The Maine Youth Action Network website, and then the Maine Youth Leadership and Development Council has recently launched a website as well. I'm gonna put away the screen share. And I know I went very fast. I've got a little New York blood in me. I apologize. The presentation link that I was using, if you want to go back through those Google Slides at a pace that is more pleasant for you, is here. There's also the direct link to the market annual report that I'm excited to tell you about, and hopefully you'll have a chance to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. That was excellent. Any questions for Beth?
I just want to say thank you. The presentation was great. I look forward to, again, like I said, to the Alphon Foundation. I look forward to, in the next year or two, seeing where the funds are going and the impact it's having. And I appreciate the work that you're doing with young people. Not a lot of time spent on these kids. And so I can speak for my role on the council is just happy we're able to be part of that. Thank you.
And Beth and Adam, can you make sure Mary has the slide decks and then we can distribute them to the full committee? Perfect, thank you. Okay. If there's no more further questions, Do we need to discuss any more process, Mary, around next steps for getting the grants out to folks? And or Pat, since Ben left us?
I don't have any further discussion points or questions around contracts in general. I think, moving forward with the youth prevention contract specifically, once the council is able to iron out the administrative funding piece, then that can be included, and I can work with both Beth and Adam to create those contracts. But that's the biggest piece for me that I think would benefit, again, the council discussion would need to happen before I can move forward. But otherwise, I'll begin, again, drafting those contracts and working with those folks to get those up and going.
Thank you. Gordon. You're on mute, Gordon.
Was your comments directed, Joe, just towards the prevention contracts or any of our contracts?
Just the prevention, but you're reading my mind. I think we do have to carve out a bit of time at the end of the meeting about next steps. So that was specifically about prevention.
Yeah.
Courtney.
Hi, sorry, Beth, if you said this, my computer died and I got kicked off the Zoom meeting, so I missed a little bit of the last of your presentation. Did you talk about when you're expecting or talking with partners about when you want this money to go out, or like a timeline around that?
Hi, Courtney. No, you didn't miss anything. I didn't talk about that. I think it's really dependent on the contracting process, right? Like we would be willing to, and we are sort of prepared on the programming side to move at the speed of the contracting process. So if that is sooner than what we've been led to believe will be a few months from now, we could be prepared to go and put together the scope of work and deliverables. And if it takes longer, then we'll move at that pace as well.
Okay, thanks, Beth. And then I think this is a question directed more at the council. When do we expect to have a conversation about indirect costs?
So that question is for the finance committee, and the question is put before them.
Okay.
And someone can refresh my mind. I can't remember when the next meeting is, but Bill talk about that. But I think that will be part of what Ben was talking about, the budget process.
Okay, that's great, Pat. Thank you.
And then adding to that, Courtney's question, in the spirit of total transparency, I invited Louise Marsden, our senior vice president, to the meeting as she can lead that conversation on behalf of TOA with Beth, since it's a conflict of interest for me as a council member. But Louise has been here for 38 years and Beth has been here a long time too. So they can help with any questions that the council may have.
So
okay.
I have a quick question for her. I don't want to elaborate, but do most organizations have a set fee of what they charge in new programs? I know that they do. And do we have an estimate what that admin cost would look like?
Pat, I assume when you said her, you meant me. Yes. I was like, are you talking to me? Yeah, I was thinking about how Joe's putting a lot of faith in me, as I'm not the finance person here at the Opportunity Alliance, but I can certainly answer some of those questions. So like in our shop, and again, Adam, I don't know how it works in your shop, but in our shop, the agency has an approved federal indirect rate. Mm-hmm. It is a process. You submit every year what your expenses are. You have to get that indirect rate approved, and then that indirect rate is applied on any new business coming through the door. I will probably not be the person, Pat, to answer real detailed finance questions about that, right? Mm-hmm. But so what I can speak to, as Joe just said, is that I, knowing that any new piece of work that comes through the shop, the standard indirect rate, whatever that is at that year, gets applied, and that share is lifted off the top. And it supports really all your support systems in your organization. It pays your HR functions, your finance departments, right? It's the dollars that provide all the supports wrapped around all the programming that you do in our shop.
Thank you. So, but that changes every year?
It does. It does. And again, Pat, like I'll take a stab at this. It's my understanding that every year you pitch what you think your rate is going to be. You take the data from the year before and you submit that. Then you live your whole year inside what you thought it was going to cost. And then you have to resubmit the upcoming year. And so again, I don't know. I'm really the wrong person to speak to sort of all those logistics, but it is a rate that is submitted for annually and approved annually, and you must live with that rate the whole year.
Thank you.
And the reason Louise and I work closely together, but she does a good job explaining it in lay people. We can certainly have our CFO, but Louise did a great job. The other reason I wanted to, Pat, I think you and I talked about offline, is that all community action agencies have a negotiated indirect rate. Because we have federal direct funding or direct funding from the federal government. So that's why we live in this unique world. So that's sort of, Pat, adds to your answer to your question. And as we think about funding more to the CAPS, then they'll be showing back up with the same information. And there are lots of organizations that are direct federal grantees. Courtney and then Brendan.
Thanks, Joe. In my typical Courtney fashion, I'm just going to ask the direct question. Louise, is the amount of money that we allocated, the $15,000, not enough money for your direct overhead expense or something? Because I feel like there's an undertone of that here. And just real quick, one follow-up question. So is that not enough money? If so, if it's not enough money, how much more money is your direct cost? And as an ad lib, I would prefer that I would advocate that if that is a stalemate on you taking this contract, that we add that to the grant, not take away from the organizations that are that are already getting funding, the council.
Fair. Yeah. So here, I'll tell you what I know. And it's actually a multi-pronged response. So it's my understanding, and again, Mary, you and I emailed in preparation for this meeting. There was this ongoing conversation about their $15,000 being allocated. What I will tell you is that when Beth built these budgets with the finance department, the $15,000 does not cover what the agency's traditional this year's indirect rate would be. And remind me, Beth, I think in the original run, it was like $22,400, somewhere in that neighborhood. But here's what's happened, Courtney, since then. You can imagine there's been a lot of conversation at our organization about this, because I think the organization cares about both things, right? It cares about being able to cover its cost of business, but it also cares deeply about what the council is attempting to do and to put the value of this money into programming and to meet the needs of young people, right? So we want to do both things. There is, in the current structure of Beth's budget, because she has subcontractual arrangements with some of the, she already has these subcontractual arrangements with some of the partners. There is a finance rule that states this, that you may charge your indirect rate only on the first $25,000. And after the $25,000 have been reached, there's no more admin rate. And so late yesterday afternoon in a room with our finance department, as we were talking this out, I was like, oh, that's fabulous, because some of the existing partners that Beth has identified for this new leg of work are partners that already exist, that Beth is already working with. And so while we've not done the math, Courtney, what we are hoping is that this new piece of information will allow us to live inside the $15,000 that's been allocated. So it's like a yes and. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Okay, yes, I think that made sense. I think that made sense to me. I guess what I'll say is if if that isn't the case, as you go through this
Yes.
process, I would like to know that, and I
Perfect.
would like to not be cutting into organizational budgets for this council to
Perfect.
make a decision about adding that, if that is the deal breaker.
That is fair, and I appreciate that, Courtney.
And in my voice, again, in a transparent way, outside of this, the prevention work, if we were funding an agency to do the recovery center or the detox center and they get $1 million, we will need to pay attention to their indirect or admin rate. This is a small amount of money, but when we start talking big chunks of money, that's when I think Courtney, is to your question, that it's a really important conversation then. It's important now, but if we don't sort of address it now, it becomes sort of, and just if we're giving out a large block of money, it really ends up being a fair amount of money.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I will say, like, in most cases, I would be advocating for a very, like, a thoughtful and also not a large physical admin rate. I just like don't want to be seeing, I want money to go to programs, which is obvious. We can talk about this later, but.
Okay, Brendan.
Hi, thanks. I think, and Pat, I understand the finance committee is going to talk about admin costs, but I think I'm not sure which committee would be best for, but I think it would be helpful for the council to have and to actually have in text a written definition of indirect costs. I personally don't know the difference between admin and indirect and if they're the same thing. And that's step one. And step two is I think it needs to be kind of written down and defined what indirect costs are. I know, and I think Mary knows this as well, that your peers in other states have done so. Different states your peers in other states handle admin or indirect costs in different ways. I imagine we can talk a little bit about that, and I think that's probably the finance committee meeting discussion. But in terms of what those costs are, I would want that to be defined. And then I think my last comment is for Liz. I know that to the extent this conversation is happening at the finance committee, I see Sheriff Brackett's on that committee, and I think it would be helpful for representatives of the subdivisions to talk about at that meeting how the subdivisions are treating admin and indirect costs from their settlement funds in particular, because the subdivisions have to apply the same MOU and the same approved uses. So it'd be useful to have some reporting either by Todd or Liz, if you want to attend also, or, it would be useful for the committee to hear how the subdivisions are handling their settlement funds in terms of indirects and admin costs.
Just by way of follow-up, Brendan, like in an agency approved indirect rate, behind it is the definition of what goes in that rate, just for context. And then similarly, when you are in the middle of contracting with the department, you must also spell that out. It's not very ambiguous, right? It's pretty laid out, and there are real expectations about what goes in there, and you need to be able to speak to those things. Yeah.
Yeah, all those definitions are in the state contracts.
Yeah.
But I will say that administrative costs for doing a program are different from indirect. So there may be, I'm thinking specifically about the work that Beth and Adam are doing, where they are, not only might they provide funding that goes to organizations, they may also do work that is part of administering, that might be the organizing partner, having staff that's bringing people together like that. That's not program dollars per se, it's a program to do the work they're doing. And so I think we'd want to consider that differently that's not the same as indirect. So I think we need to make sure that those do get defined and are seen differently, because often people need indirect, but they also need admin. But admin doesn't mean it's not doing the work. It's a part of doing the work. So
And the other thing
sorry, go
sorry,
ahead. No,
I think also the sub grantees have costs too. And I think that needs to be factored in to add to what Liz is saying. So when we look at, like, we're talking about like 30 or plus grant organizations receiving money, we need to also, appreciate what their costs are. And I know this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but I think it has to get worked out in the early days of the grant procurement.
Yeah, and I'll make sure Ben knows that, and we'll come up with a definition of direct and indirect admin cost, and how that will look, and play out.
Would it be helpful to circulate, language that other states have in place?
Yeah, Mary
Yes.
probably, particularly those that are dealing with settlement dollars. Excellent, Brendan. She can research that and then work with Ben in developing that definition.
Okay, let's quickly move into Gordon's question around sort of the next steps with the other grantees. So, Mary, Pat, any thoughts on sort of where we're at with the department per what with Dr. Squirrel, with what Ben shared, or the community action agencies, et cetera? Or are we going to work on that? Are we going to work those details out?
So one of the things we can start with is Ben has talked about, I think the easiest one to start with is the recovery center. And Ben was talking about that if it's our funding and we're going to do the contracting, we may be able to do what we wanted to do to begin with, which is sole source that recovery center and write a contract and sole source that out of Piscataquis County, out of that group that the state is actually currently working with. So that's up for discussion. That's, I think, the easier of the other one. The detox is more is more difficult in my mind. So I don't know how.
Okay, Gordon, you want to build? Gordon, go ahead, and then we can.
Yeah, I'd love to start with Piscataquis County, because I do think it's the easiest one. And I've been spending some time on it as recently as yesterday. And the question I have is that who has to authorize a sole source contract, if anyone, or we can just vote to do it. It makes a lot of sense. And because there's also an emergent existency, I probably haven't said that right, Brendan, but because you'll remember that the building in Sangerville is for sale, and it's been for sale a while. There's at least one other party looking at it. The psychologist that owns it really wants it to be used as a recovery center, but he's got a broker involved, and we can't expect this to last, indefinitely. And so we have two nonprofits that might have a role in that. One is uniquely designed to be able to buy the property with our funds and operate it. We'll want to work with them, of course, on sustainability, because even with $350,000, they could probably do something for a couple of years, but hopefully they'd eventually get into the mix of OBH supported recovery centers. I don't want to say too much, although this is the program committee. So I have asked that new nonprofit if they'd be willing to get some assistance and mentoring from the other nonprofit that's got a connection. This gets a little complicated, but I think it's absolutely doable. The owner of the Sangerville property is also on the board of the nonprofit that's opening up the residential program in Washington, Maine, in Knox County. Those 17 rooms are ready. They need some help, but because the property was donated and There's some people of Maine supporting it. The fact that the owner of the Sangerville property who lives in Sangerville but practices in Dover Foxcroft is on the board of the nonprofit that's now going to run and operate Tessa's house makes it possible to if not do it together, at least I'd like to see some real I've looked at all the membership of the two boards, and so I reached out to the new nonprofit in Piscataquis County. I said, do you think, this was just yesterday, I said, do you think you'll be willing to enter into some kind of relationship so you could get some help from the board of this other nonprofit? Two of the people on the other nonprofit, by the way, have lost daughters. One of them, Tessa, obviously. So we're ready to go. They've got the interest, they've got the property, but they need a contract from us before they can get into a purchase sale agreement on the church property, which I have seen in Sangerville, and I've not been inside it, but it's as operable as a recovery community center as any of our other centers, in my opinion, particularly for rural town. So I think everything I do, and anything we can do to help move it along, I think would be great, including potentially tomorrow, because we've already voted the concept and the money. It's just a matter, okay, how do we do it? Thanks. Sorry to take up so much time, Joe.
That was very helpful, Gordon. Brendan, do you have comments on the sole sourcing piece?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, my understanding is that the Recovery Council doesn't have to follow the state's procurement process. Its funding doesn't have to go through the procurement office, and as a result, it has greater flexibility than DHHS and other entities to be able to direct its funding, and that's all by design. So I think that the council has already directed that funding go to this particular center, or to develop a recovery center in Piscataquis County, and I think it has, from my perspective, all the authority it needs to go forward with a particular grantee. The things, though, that make this a little bit different from the other projects on the council's slate of first funding is the other projects are providing funding to sort of known and existing entities. And, this one, strikes me as worth asking the question whether and what due diligence the council feels like it needs to move forward with this particular proposed entity, and what protections the council might need to have in place in its contracting in moving forward with the project or with the folks that Gordon described, with all, just to be, to be a sort of thorough. I'm not suggesting that the folks or the project are not capable of carrying out what they, intend to do, just that it sounds like a new kind of startup thing. And, in contrast to the other projects, which are existing, like they already work in these fields, things like that. I just wonder whether there's additional due diligence that needs to happen.
Courtney, then Pat and Gordon. I may have got them mixed up, but go ahead, Courtney, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to seek clarity. I think there's two different issues that we're talking about. One, what is being called sole sourcing, and two, the actual conversation around, is this organization the right organization? Are they capable, etc. But I think, aren't we sole sourcing to everyone that we're working with. So I don't know that we even need to use that language anymore. Because I think we're just contracting with particular organizations in this round of funding. So everyone's technically a sole source, right?
Courtney, let me just clarify. And Gordon, maybe, if you know differently, you can jump in. But I think the way I think about it, without having Ben's level of expertise, is that if the funds go through DHHS may have obligations to follow the procurement rules. If the funds go directly from the Recovery Council to a grantee, the council doesn't have those same requirements. And those, because it doesn't have those, it also doesn't have the existing structures, the existing oversight, the existing protections that have been built into the procurement process.
Okay, so I that makes total sense. So because we're not using the state entities anymore, we could move away from the conversation of sole sourcing because we don't have those obligations as a council, correct? I mean, that's like an ethical, moral debate, but we don't have to do anything.
Yeah, regarding, as I understand Ben's presentation, regarding the SSPs, regarding the Piscataqua Recovery Center, and regarding the prevention programs, my understanding is the council would like to contract directly with them. Ben, as I understand it, made some suggestions that, the budget language that's needed plus the kind of RFP process might take place over the same time period and might coincide as concluding at the same time. So it may make sense to use the DHHS process, whatever that looks like. But I'm not sure. I'm not the best person to confirm that.
Okay, and then I think there's a different conversation to be had about if this is the right organization, which I don't want to speak to.
Pat, then Gordon.
So, first to answer a question, the organization is not technically new, if I'm not mistaken, Gordon. They are a new nonprofit. They have been organized for many years up in the Piscataqua area, but didn't want to be a nonprofit for whatever reason. So the nonprofit status may be new, but the organization of the people that are there have been there for a long time. But Gordon can get to that later. I think it may benefit, it's only my opinion, it may benefit to ask them to develop a proposal for us, to present it to us. Same time as we're developing our contract, is to ask them to come to us and say, okay, we are allocating this money, and ask them to bring the proposal forward as to what they see as their vision to that. And we get to know who they are through that. And that's just my suggestion on that. But again, Gordon can answer the question, but I don't think this is a new group. They're just a new nonprofit. In other words, they did the paperwork.
Thanks, Pat. And I really agree with you on your idea around the proposal and bringing it to us. Gordon.
That took care of half of what I was going to say. The people aren't new. The nonprofit they have organized is new. These are two of the 6 or 7 board members are the 2 people who came and testified at our hearing. I don't want you to think that we've moved away from them. They are really the principals behind this. They've already had an existing contract, but through a different nonprofit. Kind of a fiscal agent with the state, with OBH, to do this cafe, recovery cafe thing. That has been almost uniquely unsuccessful, frankly. But I don't think Mr. Freisinger at OBH or I think that should be laid completely at the responsibility of the people. And we believe that support can be developed locally, is already there for this bricks and mortar recovery center. So, and I think in negotiating the arrangements with them, should they make a proposal, I'll be encouraging them to have some significant mentoring or actually consulting. There is a paid consultant with the Washington project that was the psychiatric nurse practitioner who was running Bella's house. And I realize you're not all familiar with all these things, but believe me, I think about beds every day. Courtney does too. And so Bella's house is currently closed. We need to get it reopened. There's people looking to purchase it. The project in Washington is about ready to go. One of the reasons to have the Washington group help the Piscataquis group is that there's a real prospect that in that recovery center, we could start providing some treatment. Now, I grant you that requires different licenses. We start with recovery coaches, the things that recovery community centers do, and that don't require a license. But because we have the services of this very good consultant, I think that this should, I think it's the right thing to do to ask them to do the proposal, but we'll have a whole group of people helping them do that because, for one thing, we don't want this to go back and forth and then lose the property. That's all I'm saying. I think you send us a signal tomorrow, and we'll have that proposal in the March meeting, and we can hold on to the property. Won't be sold out from under us in that time frame.
Thank you, Gordon. So in the effort to sort of keep moving with sort of our open items, so are we saying that the proposal and the team could come in 2 weeks? Is that possible, Gordon? So we're on a 2-week frequency, this group.
Yeah, they could come to this group because they've been doing this kind of work for a long time, and I know the consultant well. Yes, we could. They'd be so interested in how we're getting this done. They obviously know we voted the $350,000, but they don't know the details as to how that's going to arrive. We don't either. So yes, they could come in 2 weeks. No, I have no doubt that there's some of the 23 people watching us right now.
Okay, perfect. So Mary, you can work with Gordon in your usual way to sort of line that up. So that would be, and I'm also kind of trying to structure the agenda for next time. So we would have those folks coming. What about SSPs? Where are we at with that? Is that just a matter of contracting? Does that need to come back to the?
When we look at the contract, but right now the SSPs will be that's what's going under the contracts we're currently in the process of writing. The finance committee will have to talk about how that money is dispensed, in some degree. Again, we know that we want it to go beforehand. We don't want it invoice based, but the finance committee will come up with that. So I think we're pretty much set with them for this committee right now until those contracts are ready to be reviewed, and then the budget part is done with it. And I think for the next meeting we may want to have the longer conversation, which is what are we going to do with the detox beds and how we're going to work that, because that's a more complicated issue. I don't know if you want to start that. We're done at 4, right?
Yeah, so for next meeting, are you talking about the Andro detox beds or the work that Gordon described up in Piscataquis, Washington?
The Piscataquis did come for a presentation, but if they come for a presentation, some of the other meeting, we can start the conversation about how we see the detox funds going out. Because if that's going out for an RFP or some sort of thing, we've never done that before, we have to have a longer conversation about that. But having the people come, I think, next week for the recovery center is great. And the other two, again, the other ones I think are all set with contracts.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm having a moment. So recovery, we have the folks coming about the recovery center.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, the detox beds would just be a general conversation among the committee about
how we're going to proceed.
Okay,
again, that's a longer conversation about how we're going to do that.
Okay, but we can use next time for these two conversations.
Yeah, unless Mary has a comment on it.
Well, I'm just wondering if if we want to invite Director Squirrel and others from state departments to the next Grant and Programs Committee meeting, now that we have a better sense of how that funding channel will move forward. I'm just wondering if, again, a council discussion would be great, but it may be advantageous to invite a couple members from the state to also discuss with us what that process looks like.
And I'm very open to that.
Okay.
I
Go ahead, Gordon.
well, I can speak for Ben on this. Ben's point, by the way, was that by the time that we deal with the beds in Franklin and Androscoggin, it's anticipated that he will have worked out this language in the supplemental. Because those, everybody understands, we've got existing applications out there, and honestly, we're having a really difficult time finding people to apply. So while this all seems straightforward to us, we don't want to put in all this work and then put out beautiful RFPs in the 2 counties. Not a single person applies. And then what do we do? So that's why he was never thinking about holding off on the Piscataquis County. He was talking about the detox beds. And so it's the timing of it. I want to make sure that I understand, is our next meeting, when you talk about Piscataquis coming, is that the 21st? And then we'd have another meeting on Wednesday, March 6th?
Yes.
And both those meetings would be before the next full council meeting on Thursday, the 14th.
Right.
You know, I think I've got to ask you to have the Piscataquis people come in on March 6th. And I say that because I happen to know that they have a board meeting on the 22nd, the day following the 21st. And there's a lot riding on that meeting. It's going to be at the Washington County, at the town of Washington property. Both of the boards may meet together. So they'd know a lot more if we let them get through that board meeting and put their own proposal together, by the way. And it's just going to be a day off. If we could have them, my goal would be have them be able to make some decisions at the council meeting in March. And so March 6th would still work for that if you could possibly accommodate that.
Definitely. That just changes sort of, so are we still sort of saying we want to talk about the detox, Gordon, to your point that Ben's doing work? Do we want to pause on that until, or Pat, just thoughts, wisdom around that, whether we want to talk about detox in general?
We're talking about the March 5th meeting, right?
No, we're talking about the meeting 2 weeks, which will be the 21st. But
The
now
20th?
we're going to move Piscataquis to the 6th, the 20th, yeah.
The 20th and the 5th? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I got those dates wrong. It's the 20th and the 5th. I apologize, Mary.
Well, for me, if what Gordon is saying, that makes sense, that we're going to move forward with what the original thought was the state doing the RFP for us. I'm not sure we have a conversation to have if we all agree to be patient and wait.
Then I would like to sort of, and Louise is still here, and I know we're over, that I would propose next week, that in 2 weeks, we have the family support conversation with whoever. And Louise runs all that here, and she's here listening, and we can decide who needs to participate. But I think we could bring those folks back, or invite those folks in, Mary.
I wonder if I could also propose that we have a conversation about next steps so that we can kind of move to the next thing too, while we're also juggling the things that we're doing now. In particular, I'm wondering about the application process. As many of you seen, like we're getting applications from people, they're just sending in memos. So just kind of curious about where we're at with the public application process and how to move forward. So wondering if we can have that on an agenda in 2 weeks.
Is Ella still on? Ella's been doing research. Are you able at this point to do another report to the group about what you're developing in regards to applications and grants?
Yes, definitely. I feel prepared for that.
So I don't know, Joe, if you want to add that to the agenda or not.
Yeah, I think then that would be that. I think that's a good idea, Courtney. I'm sort of trying to contain sort of like getting the money out the door to the package. So I think we got that moving. I would recommend that the family fund money, that group, we work out their invitation, they come. And then I think, and we also at that meeting do the application, have a conversation about the application process.
Yeah,
And that
'cause
would be
it's
our
right.
agenda.
It's a 2-hour meeting, right?
It's 2 hours, yeah. So like we'd have time to do both. Okay, Brendan.
Just two things, Joe, it sounds like you're very much on this. Just a reminder that Haley needs an agenda by 5 to get it noticed. Otherwise, we have to reschedule the meeting.
No, and I've been working on that as we've been talking. I just wanted to, I knew there's things floating, and I think we've done a good job sort of not getting the cart out of the horse. So everything we've lined up, I think so. Just again, next time would be the family funds, the application process. The next one would be Piscataquis, and also in 2 weeks, if we have more, we can work on that agenda then. But Brennan, to your point, I think we're good to go, and I'll get Haley the agenda.
And the other, my second brief point is just to give everyone a heads up that I will be out of the office for a week starting on the 19th.
And I'll be out from the 14th to the 19th.
Hey, what was your
Joe,
date?
if it's sorry,
Brenda,
if
what
it's
were you
okay with you, we'll send out that list of grant questions that we touched on last meeting
Perfect.
for us to then discuss at the next Grant and Programs Committee meeting.
Perfect. Did I cut anyone off? Is there any questions, comments from the group? I'm sorry, I sort of was just trying to get us to the finish line.
No, Joe, you got us there very well.
You've been great, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Just
Thank
want all
you.
voices
Good
to
night.
be heard.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
See you all Thursday.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.